Hello and welcome to the Virginia Solar Summit live stream. I'm your host, Dan French. Top of the morning to you. We're so glad to be back again live with you all, and looks like we got a good group joining us right on time. We are live streaming on Zoom and YouTube, and it's archived out there where it will live forever. So we're going to get right to the show today. A lot of great stuff to get to. Really excited to get our speaker, who a lot of you may know, but we're happy to dive in and explore the details of the Renaissance, making it very real and getting in the field quite directly. So we are the Virginia Solar Summit. This is our live stream, but we are coming back in person for another exciting, market-making, difference-making, project-level event. Very substantive, one of the most substantive programs you'll find anywhere, and doubling down on the networking this year. So if you've been pent up, if you're feeling spring coming on, we're gonna get together with hundreds and hundreds of our friends from across the region and across the country. There's folks coming even from Canada down for this event. We are co-hosted again by Virginia DEQ, Virginia Energy, the West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center at West Virginia University, and Appalachian Voices. You can learn more on our website, virginiasolarsummit.com. Early bird tickets are still available. On today's episode of our live stream, special guest Lindsay White. She is the Director of Development for Monarch Vegetation Services, Inc. But before I get to her, I have to give big, beautiful love to our sponsors. We are brought to you today by Dominion Energy. Hashtag Action Speak Louder. Make sure they just put out a big RFP you might have seen, or announced the awards. So make sure you check out their website for the latest in solar. A lot of project announcements. Very exciting times in Virginia. We're also brought to you by Mission Disposal, Inc., the essential site services company, and they're also on the ground, making it real, bringing the Renaissance to life project by project. More about them in a moment. We are brought to you by Dominion Energy, Mission Disposal, and all of our wonderful sponsors there, including Monarch Vegetation Services, who is joining us today, who is lending us the expertise of one of their queen bees today. Also, just quick shout outs. I want to again point everyone to a big refresh over on the website of our friends at the Solar Working Group of Southwest Virginia, and you can check out their new website there. It's really a bastion, a basket of resources, and I encourage everyone to check it out. Even you pros, maybe a great place to direct some of the new folks who are getting into this space and getting excited about solar. And then this is a new webinar series coming up very soon. Some of our friends, kindred spirits, concerned and passionate about the future of Appalachia. I highly encourage this 4-part series coming up starting March 24th. You can see it there, getting into some of the details of how we are going to reface and revitalize Appalachia and our country beyond. Next week on the Virginia Solar Summit live stream, Mr. Andrew Turner. He is the president of Mission Disposal, aforementioned. We're so grateful for their support and grateful for their mission-oriented approach in Virginia, really down on the ground, making it work for communities, hiring folks and making it happen. There's a lot that goes into these solar projects, especially at scale, and that is the future. No one understands this better than Mr. Turner. So we're rolling our sleeves up and getting dirty this week, and we're going to do the same next week. Okay, without further ado, our special guest today, Miss Lindsay White. She is the Director of Development at Monarch Vegetation Services, where she, as a lot of folks in the space know, she's communicating with developers every day. She's thinking about the possibility of incorporating pollinator-friendly vegetation and other beneficial vegetation on their sites, ranging from capped landfills even. And they're doing this not just in solar. So they're the beneficial vegetation specialists. That's annotation by me. But Monarch Vegetation Services is providing as well installation on utility-sized solar farms. So we're ready to plant seeds at scale. But before Lindsay joined Monarch Vegetation Services, she was actually working in the medical industry. She's got a really big heart. She was helping transition patients from hospitals to long-term care. She's a mother, she has a daughter, And she's one of these folks, kind of like me, who felt the urge of their roots emerge, and she wanted to escape city life and went back to small town America. Cochranton, she can correct me on the pronunciation of that later. That's where she is now. And she's joined forces over there at with Robin Ernst and others, a lot of other stars at Monarch Vegetation Services. And she's one of the most clever and talented people I know. I have to brag on her for just a little bit because she's doing a lot more than just saving the world, saving the bees and butterflies with her pollinator habitats. She makes jams, other canned goods. She's quite the artisan, and it's not just my opinion, although I have tasted it and it's delicious. It's a blue ribbon winner. So you can find her at some of the festivals there in Pennsylvania, and I highly recommend it. So the one that I love the most in it is I haven't tried them all, but the first place finisher at the Pennsylvania State Farm Show was her pineapple habanero. And Miss White, welcome to the show. Can I bring you in on pineapple habanero?
Well, that was quite the introduction. I appreciate it. The other star guest that I have with me is Randy Grout, who has a very strong background in agriculture. He's our project manager. And I brought him in to answer everybody's questions when it comes to vegetation. So thank you for having us and allowing us to be on and highlighting what we do. And I have a slideshow really quickly to show you guys some of our background and some photos so you can get a better understanding of what we do.
Well, seeing is believing, and a picture's worth a million words in this case. And that's really what I'm excited about is I've seen it myself, but for the uninitiated, we're really going to get close-up view on how y'all are actually doing this stuff and harnessing kind of the natural power of the earth. And I'm a total novice myself. I learn something every time I engage with y'all. And it's very, very exciting as an energy guy. Oh, it's beautiful. I can see it. Take it away, please.
All righty. So Monarch Vegetation Services, we are a mobile installation company, and we focus on beneficial vegetation. Our service area is the East Coast, anywhere east of the Mississippi. And why we stay in our area is because we know the soil conditions here. We have a better understanding of what invasives to prepare for. So we typically stay east of the Mississippi. Our service area so far has been as far north as Vermont, as far south as North South Carolina. So with our focus being on beneficial vegetation, we get asked quite a bit, why would we consider doing anything other than the typical fescue? And our goal with this beneficial vegetation is that we are going to incorporate diversity. We are going to add beautification to the site, but also we're going to lean very heavy on having that vegetation act as an erosion control. I think vegetation is a critical erosion control that gets overlooked. So that is one of the picture on the left. That is one of the sites that was taken last spring. It's an NREL project, and that species there is blue flax, and it turned out beautiful. So now that we know that we're going to be using beneficial vegetation, the big asset that we go towards is definitely seed selection, which is very important. You're going to want to do a soil sample and know what is your ground's conditions. Also, you're going to consider the panel heights, which is a big thing for us, because the higher the panels, the more diversity that we can include in a seed mix. Typically, we like 36 inches is like the sweet spot. But when you're cutting it down, like for instance, the further south projects where there's no snow load, the lower to the ground, the less that we can put in the array. The other big thing is purchasing your seed ahead of time. These projects, there's so much that goes into them, and we understand construction timeline is always a moving target. But the sooner that you can purchase your seeds, the less substitutes that we would have to prepare for, so on and so forth. But the other big part of your seed selection is going to be, what is the project's main goal? Is it going to be pollinator friendly? So you're going to want to make sure that you have species that can sustain honeybees on site. Is it going to be sheep grazed? Is it, that is just a critical thing to know when designing your seed mix. The other thing also is what your permit says. So we have a seed mix called the Fuzz and Buzz that we install. We've done hundreds of acres with the Fuzz and Buzz. Our connection with Ernst Seed, we get this question quite a bit because we used to be Ernst Pollinator Service and then we rebranded. Our president is Robin Ernst, and her family, they own Ernst Conservation Seeds. And what happened is Robin grew up in the seed industry and said, you know what? We need somebody to do the installation. So she started our separate company. It was originally Ernst Pollinator Service. Then everybody contacted us just to purchase seed. And we said, oh no, we're doing the installation. So that is the family, how it boils down and how we're related to them. But our seed mix, the Fuzz and Buzz, was designed with Cornell University, American Solar Grazing Association, Ernst, and ourselves. And what the goal of the seed mix is to tie together everybody, the sheep grazing and also some benefits of pollinator friendly. Sheep grazing is a hot topic that we get asked questions about up and down all over the East Coast here. And it's exciting to see how we can incorporate these sheep on solar sites. So cover crops. One thing about cover crops and these sites is you want the solar sites as green as possible. You want to make sure that you're maintaining the stabilization at all times. Cover crops are super cheap. We have worked on sites where the farmer who originally had the land, where he was brought in before construction to throw down seed and get it green as possible. Also, your EPC or whoever else is on site is able to throw down cover crops. Now, in regards to cover crops, you are going to want one of the ones on the left that's listed, your grain rye, your millet. The one we do not want to see is annual rye. Annual rye, right?
Typically, yeah.
Yeah. Annual rye will choke out any of the beneficial vegetation. We are firm believers in buttoning up sites, keeping them as green as possible, and also to make sure that we are preventing any erosion and runoff. Oh, and one more thing, that picture is one of our vent tracks, and on the back, that is just a broadcast seeder. When we do cover crops, it's easy to just throw down 30 pounds an acre, roughly.
Depending on the species, the German millet we use often goes down at about 15 pounds to the acre, and the oats and the grain rye, it'll range from 30 to 40 pounds to the acre.
Okay. All righty, so now that we have gotten our seed selection, the big thing is our site preparation before we get on site. Herbicide, we do in-house have licensed herbicide sprayers. The big thing about herbicide is everybody has different opinions. We are big about choking out what's currently there, because if it's not going to be friendly, it will just kill the natives. We do a lot of spraying before construction. We also, as a controlled method after it's vegetated, we do spot spray. If a site has been previously logged, for instance, the bare ground, it may look completely exposed and you're like, oh, there's nothing there to choke it out. The truth of the fact is there can be teeny tiny saplings that will eventually grow and choke out the whole entire site, and they will grow up through panels. Now, we have been on sites where we are not allowed to spray. When we do not spray, what that does is it cancels out that warranty, because we cannot guarantee what it's going to look like and what could actually be creeping into these sites. So our seeding methods are, where we stand out is our drill seeding. We use no-till drills. And the nice thing about drill seeding is we can put down the cover crop with the permanent seed at the same time. So it's one It's all in one there. Hydro seeding and then broadcasting. Recently, we have seen a change when it comes to seeding solar sites where we're actually seeding pre-construction. So they're taking these fallow farm fields and we get the opportunity to go out and drill seed and install vegetation before construction, which is great because it's less cost per acre. Then afterwards, what we do is we go through and we touch up seeding post-construction. When it comes to hydro seeding, we do not recommend putting natives through the hydro seeder. They do not achieve good seed to soil contact. We have in fact drill seeded first and then hydro seeded over it. And we use that hydro mulch as an erosion control method. And then lastly, our broadcasting, depending on what the panels look like. For instance, if they're fixed tilts, what we try to do, we try to get as much seed to soil contact as possible, especially even underneath the array. But if they're fixed tilts and we can't get underneath due to some of them have those cross wires on the back, then we scarify and then we broadcast seed over it. Anything you want to add on broadcasting or anything?
I think you covered that pretty well.
Alrighty. So the one thing about drill seeding though, like the bottom picture, for instance, that was on a capped landfill. Where our guys, I cannot say highly enough, this is why I stay in the office and not in the field, is they back in and out of arrays on panels. I can hardly back into a parking space, yet alone in between solar panels. It'd be traumatic. We would probably never get another contract again. So that is another thing to consider about seeding pre-construction is we don't have to work around these panels. So straw mulching. Keep in mind the pictures on the left and the right are two separate sites. Straw mulching is definitely a very good erosion control method. We preach a lot of this because not only is it protecting the seeds, it's also protecting from runoffs. And typically we do 2 tons per acre.
Typically 2 tons per acre of straw mulch.
We're seeing a lot of developers and municipalities who don't consider the importance of straw mulching. Typically, we like to see it just to really secure and prevent erosion. What I do. Lindsay coming to mess today. Oh, present. Starting over from the beginning.
Technical difficulty. We're working through it.
So I know the next slide, let's see, after straw mulch. Is maintenance, and I will let Randy talk about maintenance.
So maintenance after a site has been seeded is really critical, especially when considering putting pollinators and natives into a site. The way native vegetation establishes in comparison to non-native species is very different. Your non-natives have a tendency to outgrow and outcompete native seedlings very quickly. And if you're not able to control that rate of growth and kind of prevent additional seed production from those invasives or non-target species, you really run into a brick wall when it comes to establishing that native mix that you've just seeded. So a couple of things we do, we really like to stay with the project in the first 3 years after seeding is complete. We consider that 3 years the establishment period. And there's various, maintenance methods we use during that 3-year period at different times of the year and at different intensities to help minimize non-target species regrowth. Maintenance mowing and spot spraying are the 2 most common maintenance practices we use, especially in the first growing season following seeding. That tends to be a very critical time period to be able to control those non-target species, the invasives, the cool season grasses. You're going to find you're typically going to see more mowing in that time and in that time frame, that first growing season after construction, just to be able to keep the vegetation heights low enough to allow enough sunlight to reach those native seedlings that are germinating. If those non-target species shade those seedlings out, those seedlings they don't have a chance. They tend to wither up and die. They just don't get enough sun. So maintenance mowing is a very critical aspect to the maintenance in that first growing season. Site inspections, they'll tell us, what levels of invasives and what densities are trying to come back into the site. Things like Canadian thistle, they have a tendency to come back in large groups, thick colonies if you don't get on top of them right away. So spot spraying is a method we use to control a lot of those invasives that want to colonize. We'll spot spray areas where density is too thick, where mowing alone won't be enough. And in those cases, you may have to sacrifice those areas that are being overtaken and use an herbicide that may kill everything, and do some touch-up seeding and some reseeding in those locations. But it's just kind of the nature of the beast, because if you don't deal with those invasive species as soon as possible, you're going to lose that area, and then the chance of those species spreading just creates a higher risk for establishment failure across the site.
One thing about mowing is O&M guys are great at mowing, but to the sense that they typically will scalp a site.
And that's where it becomes very important to have a contractor that understands natives. Just throwing any landscape company at it is just because of the cheapest option, doesn't yield the result all the time that you're looking for. As I said, the first year of growth after seeding is complete is so critical. And, typically you're going to see yourself mowing 8 to 12 inch height a few times during that first growing season, just to keep the competitive vegetation at a lower height to allow those seedlings to continue to mature. And the goal is to clip those invasives and those cool season grasses back to a point, but not clip the natives as they're establishing as well. So that's something to factor into when you're looking to perform a maintenance action, is to be able to go in, identify your species, your native mix, identify the species that are germinated, identify what height they're at. And the goal is to be able to clip that site, to mow it at a height that's not going to impact your new seeding, but is going to kind of minimize the height of the competition and prevent that competitive vegetation from producing additional seed, which is then going to interfere with the future establishment and cause higher risk of non-native and invasive species from creeping back into the site.
Future maintenance.
So as I said, the first 3 years we consider that establishment period, and the goal is by that third growing season to get a mature establishment on the site of the target seed mix that's been seeded. Beyond that third year, once you've got a mature site, really, especially with the natives, the goal is to mow just one time during the year, typically during a dormant season. So you can do, an early spring mowing to kind of chop up the dead fodder and thatch from previous year's growth, or you can go in the fall when everything's gone dormant, and you can perform that mowing maintenance at that time. Oftentimes you can mow a little bit lower to the ground once everything's dormant. A typical mower is capable of performing the task. And then from that point out, it's really just a matter of monitoring what's trying to come back into the site. There's so many variables that are out of our control, between what's in the seed bank, birds dropping seed back into a site, wind blowing invasive species back into a site. So continued monitoring is going to be needed to see how the site's growing, how it's established, what's the predominant species or mix in the site. And if you find that you're getting more and more invasives into the site. Every couple of years, you might have to go back in, do an herbicide spot spray to target some of those areas of the site. So, invasive species don't colonize and don't try to take over the site again. So typically first 3 years are the most intensive. The goal is after that, one mowing a year, and every couple of, 2-3 years, they have to perform a spot spray to take care of some additional invasives.
And that's the benefit of the beneficial vegetation, is we're helping save the O&M cost for mowing. And sometimes on sites, what we do is we install 2 separate seed mixes, because we know on the inside of the array, say the O&M contractor has the vegetation there. When we know that the site is going to get scalped, what we do is would put a separate seed mix on the inside. And then on the outside, we do a showier seed mix where they won't be in and out of maintaining it there. And then that's just one of our common diagrams that you get to see. Underneath the array is the roots for that turf grass. So as you can see, there's nothing stabilizing the soil compared to those natives and other beneficial vegetation. So there is a way to contact us, and that's so far what I have for you guys.
Awesome. Looks great. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge and science packed into just a few slides there. Not to mention millions of years of evolution. So thanks you both. And Randy, thank you for joining. I appreciated your practical expertise, being in the field, going field by field. Can we maybe, one of my first questions is, can you talk about kind of what you're seeing now in the field? I know you guys are busier than ever and the space is growing, but you can maybe look positively through the market and even negatively. Like what are some of the obstacles that you all are encountering out there on the front lines?
So I think I guess there's 2 obstacles that really stick out from our end when beginning a discussion with a client. One is, Lindsay mentioned, the panel height. If we've got 36 inches from ground to the lower leading edge, it creates a pretty nice condition to be able to go in with native pollinators and established pollinator habitat. You walk into a site and it's got 20 inches from ground to lower leading edge. It's a whole different environment. The diversity of species we can choose to incorporate into the site is much more limited. So you've got species diversity issues. And then the worry is, what is the future maintenance going to look like on this site? Not all these projects are going after a scorecard. Not all of these projects have a requirement on the permit to be pollinator. Sometimes it's just a matter of the developers doing the right thing, wants to see beneficial vegetation, but they're not going to risk shading issues if species start to get taller than that lower leading edge. And the worry is, are they going to then hire teams to go in and start mowing the site more frequent? If you're going to mow the site 4 times a summer, then you're really not creating any benefit to the pollinators. You're going to find yourself mowing during, peak bloom periods. If there's no bloom, no flowers, there's no food for the bees. So we really want to avoid those situations. So that's really one of the factors that limits what you're going to put into a site. So that really is one of the main issues we run into, I guess, is what are we able to put into a site, and is the owner going to be willing to stick with this maintenance program to create a beneficial habitat?
Yeah, I know. I'm certainly having that conversation all the time, and I'm at the kind of strategic level, helping folks try to see around the next corner. And this you said doing the right thing, and I'm having that against kind of the future value of these projects too. I think we're looking maybe at the next generation of eco credits and some other things, and some investors and developers are starting to see the value in these truly functional habitats. But Lindsay, can we zoom up a level? There's a director of development. Randy mentioned permits. Can you help us think through, at the project level, how you approach these projects, from zero and boot them up?
Yeah, I think One thing to consider is the vegetation itself needs to be treated as an asset separately. Because a lot of these fields are previously agriculture. So in the long term, coming from a farmer's perspective, that ground soil condition is everything, and soil health is a big part of that. So as far as like even looking so far down the pipeline, like to decommissioning, when we're installing this beneficial vegetation, we're really returning this once exposed soil during construction that's now going to be in the long run better, and it's going to be able to return to the next phase of what goes in at a healthier rate. I'd love to see more seeding pre-construction being considered. When we get these calls of like, hey, I have 300 acres, it was farmed, there's such a critical window that they could play up and save a lot of money, save themselves from paying fines, of rotating it straight, and also incorporating the farmer who's, leasing the land. He can take that from a fallow field into a cover crop, into construction, and then we would come right behind it.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying there. Double underscore all that, soil health being everything. I think it's absolutely right. We could kind of reorient everything towards the bees and the butterflies in the soil. I think a lot of things would get easier in the coming century. And the idea of kind of the decommissioning cha-ching. I mean, in the industrial space, we're dealing with that all the time, often in a negative context. The factory closes and then we have kind of some buzzards who come in and sell off some of the metals and maybe some of the machinery, and there's nothing but an empty shell left, a brownfield, which is near and dear to the heart of our audience here at our land use based solar event. But we're really going to leave more value behind. I think about it like the ultimate fallow use. It's just sitting there under fancy fencing, basically. And we're punting this soil. It's not going to be under concrete like we did during the great suburban boom in America. So this is a land boom of a different color. We've talked about farmers a few times, and I know you guys talk to farmers. I'm talking to a lot of farmers every day, and they're thinking about this new longer term vision. The buzzword is agrivoltaics, and I think we'll get there. But Lindsay, I think you mentioned sheep. The market's already moving. A lot of farmers I talk to, they're getting it. And like you and I talked about live pound prices for sheep. Can we focus maybe on the buzz of, speaking of fuzz and buzz, the buzz of the moment, which is the sheep business?
The sheep. So Randy himself being the farmer, we know that it's a great way for the farmer to still, not on top of leasing the land, it's a great way for him to yield higher profits and incorporating all these sheep. So in our neck of the woods, we have a lot of like 5th and 6th generation farmers. And recently we are seeing less and less desire to farm. They don't see the money in farming. But sheep grazing is definitely a great way for farmers to shift gears and maintain the vegetation. It's definitely critical that they have the right vegetation though. That's why our fuzz and buzz has been so popular. But the sheep grazing itself, we leave that to the professionals at the American Solar Grazing Association. There's a lot of great sheep grazers out there that we leave that aspect to them and let them do their thing, and we install the seed. And it's definitely, we're big supporters of the rotational grazing, where they're not just going to completely scalp the site. That's why we like to see them continuously grazed by a professional grazer.
Yeah, shout out ASGA and their original founding, I think, executive director, Lexi Hain, just got hired by BP Lightyear as the director of agrivoltaics. And it's really nice to see kind of big industry moving in these directions. Randy, you're a farmer. I grew up a farm kid, and I'm from downstate Illinois, where I bounced around some of the 1 and 2 factory towns around there. We've got a pocket of ponies. Shout out Walker Standardbreds. We got the biggest buggy race in the world down there in Springfield, Illinois still. But I've been telling everybody, forget about the ponies. My mom, we bred Labradors growing up. Forget about the puppies and ponies and get into sheep. I mean, can you, as a farm guy, how do you see this kind of moment of ecological and economic opportunity?
Right now, on the economic opportunity, sheep grazers, sheep shepherds, they're rolling in it. Market prices for sheep, for lambs and sheep, and it's not just lambs. I mean, mature ewes and the males. I mean, I'm seeing prices out here in Northwest PA. It's not uncommon to see an old ewe go for between $400 and $500 right now, which is uncanny. I mean, those are prices I've never seen before.
Puppy prices. Hell yeah.
Yeah. So on the sheep grazing for the shepherd, this opportunity does create a much more consistency for them. I think in a lot of cases, these shepherds are bringing their sheep in. The shepherds are getting paid kind of a maintenance fee, a vegetation maintenance fee, mowing fee, if you will, to bring their sheep in and graze these sites. So they're getting paid to graze on somebody else's grass. That's a plus all the way around. And then on top of that, the current market prices, it's just a win-win for the shepherd and the solar developer, the owner of the site. They're getting cheaper maintenance. And when you look at the holistic, I guess, look at the market and the way this works, the grazing, the shepherd being paid to bring sheep in is offsetting those market downturns in sheep prices that they might have suffered before. So it creates an opportunity where they can consistently maintain what they need in a herd, in a flock, and take advantage of those wins like we have right now in the market price. So it is definitely an upside. I don't see a lot of downside to those folks that have the ability to get into these sites, establish these relationships, and got to create their own, micro market in their area for this kind of opportunity.
Yeah, having done some policy work with USDA as well, food shed development, we called it. We've been trying to diversify farm revenues all the while. Is it whether it's livestock or some kind of fruit or vegetable patch, or chopped vegetables or some kind of value-added agriculture. We looked at shared use kitchens, anything, and it's been a struggle. Some things have worked and some haven't, depending on where you are and this and that. But this is, I think it's a movement. It's kind of sweeping the nation. Even out on Hawaii, Oahu, is it Oahu Grazers or Aloha Grazers? I'll have to put that in the show notes. But you can follow them on Instagram, and they've got so many sheep now they need more dogs, because the wild dogs have figured out that these sheep are vulnerable and penned up as they rotate kind of from solar farm to solar farm. And so that now that they're begging for great sheep dogs. So it's great to see this kind of virtuous circle carrying a lot of places who've been waiting for the rains to come for a long time, really start to field them on. And we've got some great questions. Actually, I'm going to get right to them. We won't hold them in the chat or hold them till the end, because we can get, some specific. I see Stephen asking about what is the fee. I think he's talking about the shepherd's fee, and I've seen anywhere from $100 to $300 per acre. Do you guys? That's not your business, but are you tracking numbers on that level?
We get to see it every now and then, and I would say yes, that's the range we've seen as well. It ranges a lot by region.
Mm-hmm.
And it truthfully is no different than like maintenance mowing. If you get down to the Carolinas, you can get a site mowed for a lot less money per acre than you can in Massachusetts or Vermont. Just the difference in the regions and the market pricing, it'll vary that much.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen was also asking about seed. I think, Stephen, you might have joined us late. Do they have a seed mix for ground mounted projects for sheep? They do. Fuzz and Buzz. Yeah. We mentioned that at the top of the show. And a lot of folks are familiar with that. Really establishing a brand out there, highly functional brand and potent. But cows, not so much. And I saw you asking about.
We have seen one solar site with cows.
Okay,
we didn't get to work on it ourselves, but
No.
The panels were 10 feet up off the ground. The only downside to that is taking it to scale to a utility. The price of steel is just not feasible. But for smaller projects out of the Northeast, they were able to mount them up 10 feet up off the ground.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. If you could, I don't know if I've seen that project. If you could drop that in the chat, or we'll find that and put that in the show notes too. I am familiar with a new pilot project at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where they're exploring some of the economics and functionality of cattle, of high raised panels for cattle underneath. So yeah, the future is very bright. The first generation of projects are kind of in the ground. They put solar panels over a cranberry bog up in the Northeast. I think that was Blue Wave. And there's a vineyard in France, and there's berry patches in Holland, and there's an apple orchard in Germany now. So it's pretty exciting to see. But we talked about too, like, can we pivot maybe away from farming now back to nature and this kind of rewilding movement? And there's a lot of pieces that come together on that, even carbon capture. But certainly kind of the reverse of, I read an important book as a young person, Ecological Imperialism, about, part of Columbus's magic was sneaking pigs onto those islands, and then they'd come back, and all the native species were totally destroyed, and there's a bunch of fat pigs waiting to be slaughtered. And we're kind of reversing that. But sometimes going to extreme measures, as Randy mentioned, like dropping the herbicide, you got to kill everything. But can you guys think through the value of the ecological restoration aspect of what you're doing, whether it's bees and butterflies or the little furry creatures? The future of agrivoltaics is very promising and shiny, but we're also doing a lot just for the natural critters that are out there in this work.
Mm-hmm.
We are. And I think one of the things that gets overlooked a lot is the microbiology in the soil, the critters that are in the soil. So, the tangible things that people see every day, the butterfly out in the field, the bee on the flower, the rabbits bouncing through the grass, that's something that's always, or oftentimes is in the forethought with a lot of people when they're talking about, beneficial habitat and wildlife enhancement. But the microbiology that keeps that soil healthy, the earthworms that eat and decompose and poop out all this material that's decomposing in the ground, that's something that really gets overlooked. And what a lot of people may not correlate is the benefit to those microorganisms in future agriculture. I mean, to just go in and plant a turf type mix on a piece of property underneath a solar panel and mow it for the next 30 years, the opportunity you're missing to enhance that soil biology for future use is so significant. And it really is something that I don't think a lot of people stop to think about when they think vegetation in the solar field. If you're going to go in and basically desecrate that microbiology population, you're going to have to start over in 30 years when it's not there. And to miss that opportunity to build that and increase the soil health that way over a 30-year period, it just doesn't make sense to miss that opportunity to me.
Especially this 30 years, right? I mean, it's a window. I think we maybe have reset the shot clock with our energy abundance and economic run we've had maybe since the last crash, but the clock's ticking. And Lindsay, can you look ahead, skating to where the puck will be, the future value, we mentioned that before, of the soil, these kind of oases that y'all are building, and really locking up, putting on a project timeline for the next generation to figure out. It's going to come back richer and healthier and better, for Mother Earth, but our communities. Can you speak? Can we zoom up a little bit? Speak a little bigger about the value of these projects.
Well, definitely with the new expansion, not only of these solar sites, but all the buildings that are coming in, pollinators are at a critical loss of habitat. So every square foot that we can incorporate in better vegetation is not only great for them, but it's also going to help the farmers that surround those fields that are going to yield higher crops and the beautification on site. And just providing more habitat for everybody. I mean, native vegetation, they grow in clump forms. So sometimes there's some bare spots in small quantities, and it's actually good for burrowing insects, which get overlooked quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question in the chat. Zooming in, can we think through, get specific with our species, or as specific as you want to get, but how are we matching up, right? Farming, as we mentioned, is very local and regional. It kind of each food shed is renders unto itself. And the ecology is the same thing too. I think a lot of gardeners are familiar, with the map. What zone are you in, and when, what do you plant and when? But how are y'all winning the battle, of natives versus the non-natives because you have an expansive practice, working on all types of land topologies in the, across the country.
So I guess I don't know how specific to answer that if I understand it completely, but
sorry, how do you match
Go ahead.
species? Yeah, on site. I apologize, I butchered that. Yeah, how do you pick what the native species are when you go into a project?
So a lot of it, so I'll give you one example. We've got a project in Massachusetts that was a gravel pit, and there's a lot of limestone in the area. The soils are very high pH on this project. So that project in particular, we're orientating our species selection to those that can tolerate higher pHs. And oftentimes, in that scenario, yes, you can go in with a soil acidifier and get a temporary kind of adjustment to soil pH and then hope for the best. But in all reality, that site's going to revert back to that higher pH just naturally over time. It's kind of like, farmers liming a field. You're going to need to put lime. If you've got a pH problem in your field, you're going to have to go back out there every couple of years and apply lime to keep that pH in the range that you want for the crops that you're planting. That specific site, we're orientating the species to match the site rather than the other way around. It's a much more cost-effective and practical approach. The other factors that we look at a site is kind of the soil, the hydrology of the site. Is it a wet site? Is it a dry site? Do we have heavy clays? Do we have sand? Is it gravelly? All those kind of variations determine what we're going to be able to put into a mix in that site. And then we even get into positions like I was just looking at a project in New York where they're having a difficult time establishing an approved seed mix because so many species are, even though they're native to, say, the eastern half of the country, they're not native to that specific region in New York. That creates a whole nother challenge because now not only are you looking at panel height, soil conditions, but now you have to factor in what's native to that specific region of a state, and that really dilutes the diversity you can choose from to put into a site. And some projects, so we have projects like that, and then we have other projects that are just strictly want to see beneficial vegetation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically native. So that's where, that project she showed with the blue flax, that project didn't have to be specifically native, just beneficial vegetation, pollinator friendly species. So that site was a combination of non-native flowers and native flowers. So it really does vary depending on the region you're in, how specific the plant selection has to be, what your soil conditions are going to be, and what the end goal of the project is going to be is really what's determining what gets put in. We do have for the most part, our go-to species in these solar fields that we like to stick with on the native side that we know do well. And then there's plenty of species I'd love to add to that list. It's just a panel height restriction causes us to have to go in a different direction. So.
Awesome answer. Thanks. It's amazing, how sophisticated the toolbox has become, and we can even strive to achieve, specific objectives on site, which makes me hopeful for the future. If we can start some long-term thinking, start thinking in centuries, who knows where the planet might be, in 22 or something like that. Specific follow-up though from Mr. Joe Belmonte, which you actually asked a while ago. Are you seeing calls for native mixes in open areas and sediment basins as well as around and under solar panel arrays?
Yeah, we are. We get contacted by quite a few homeowners even that just have, open meadows that either they leased out to a farmer in the past or it's a new homeowner with this. Now they have this meadow they want to do something with. So it is pretty common now for even just residential homeowners, or even on the commercial side, a big company that's got an open field and they're trying to move towards this rewilding practice, to see projects coming in open fields. They come across our desks more often now.
Awesome. And we kind of danced around this topic, and it was on the top of my sheet, but we've had such a good conversation. But I do want to come back. Someone's asked about published comparison costs. So you can follow up and we can get into that, the debate about how much does this cost on the front end versus the long-term O&M. But the question is, do you have any published cost comparisons for long-term maintenance of natives and pollinators versus faster establishing turf type species that help to achieve compliance more quickly?
The only person that I know who has those published numbers is NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. They have a study. We did have an article written about us from John Weaver that's titled "A Penny a Watt," and that was breaking down the numbers to incorporate the beneficial vegetation. There's so much wiggle room because no two sites are the same. So for instance, out of Massachusetts, say you go after the silver status, we've seen seed mixes upward of $4,300 an acre. All native, all beneficial, but yet we're able to take other sites in native beneficial vegetation and bring down that price per seed for the acre to say.
Oh, I've had native mixes in the $500 an acre range in comparison. And if you really want to do some comparison, it's not always apples to apples because there's so many kind of variations of non-native mixes you can put in. But one mix in particular, at the recommended seeding rate with the species, it's a turf type mix. Right now that mix is going to cost you right around $1,000 an acre, just on the seed cost alone. Whereas we could come in with a native mix, pollinator mix, and install that at $600 an acre seed cost. So there's a little misconception that on the front end natives are going to cost you more. It's not always the case, and I think a lot of what's driving a lot of that difference right now is the fescue shortage we're seeing because of last year's crop failure with the fescues. So it's not always the case that natives are going to cost you more money. And I think in what you just previously asked, that does kind of bring into another scenario or another question where you've got developers that are concerned about how fast you can get a site established. A pure native site, typically we're seeing a 2 to 3 year window to get a site established to the point they can get off permit. Natives just inherently, they develop slower than the non-native species, which is why fewer and fewer native species are found, because the non-native stuff outcompetes it and blocks it out. But I guess what I'm getting at, if rate of establishment is a concern for a site to get off permit, don't let that shy you away from trying to move forward with additional beneficial vegetation on a site. Just because we've got some non-native grasses that go into a site to get quicker permanent establishment, it doesn't mean we can't incorporate additional forbs into the site to enhance that site even further. Is it going to be an all native site? No, but does it necessarily have to be an all native site? Why can't we just incorporate some of the native pollinators or even non-native pollinating species into that site to get a better environmental uplift and kind of try to meet two goals at the same time?
See the long-term cost savings in the O&M for maintenance. So a lot of these asset owners who are going to be paying the maintenance long-term, they need to consider reducing that mowing cost and doing the beneficial vegetation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question about speaking of seed mixes and costs, and you mentioned residential customers. Are there any recommendations that you would make to a residential customer looking for a native seed mix to help them lower their project cost, or maybe some specific species?
I mean, to tell you that if you wanted to get simple, I personally really like a black-eyed Susan, lance leaf coreopsis, perennial blue flax combination. And then there's multiple other species you can add in and build from there. It gets you good spring and kind of early summer color and bee foraging opportunity. And then look further into maybe some later species, some asters and some goldenrods that you could incorporate in with those for some, later in the season foraging opportunities for the insects. For the general homeowner, typically what I'll start with, if they don't really have a good idea of what they want, Ernst Seed has a couple of mixes. They're 153, which is a Northeast showy grass and wildflower mix. It's a good starter. It's pretty cost effective when trying to establish kind of a native habitat. It's incorporating the native flowers and the native grasses. Something, if they want to get showier and spend some more money, the 153-1, which is more or less the same mix minus the grasses. It's more costly, but it definitely gives you a big bang for your buck on the bloom side. So those two mixes are oftentimes where I'll start with a residential homeowner, unless they've got something specific that they want to move towards.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy. And Lindsay, can I square you up on for a developer, starting from zero, how do you think about your elevator pitch to them, your message, how do you make them see the value of this approach? Just like Randy did for a homeowner, how should they be thinking about it, and what are the steps that they should take?
So I always highlight, of course, seeding pre-construction to get a jump on vegetation underneath the panels. So that way that vegetation under the panels is a check dam, but also they need to consider the upfront early in advance, because the greener we can keep these sites, the less that they're going to run into the stormwater issues. But also I'm a firm believer of keeping it green to also involve the communities as much as possible. We do a lot of sites that we have horticulture students, FFAs, even 4-H members that come out and see our seeding and see it in action. And I'm a big believer that the vegetation needs to be treated as like a long-term asset separate, because we did touch on the decommissioning, and they're providing such a better future by adding some beautification to the site. So that way, when that person is driving by the solar, they're not only viewing just the panels, they're viewing something that means a little bit more to them with good vegetation screening and established vegetation.
Awesome. Thank you. So top of the hour, we're in bonus time. If you have, we've got some good folks still sticking around. If you have some questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, but I don't have a hard break. I have a couple extra questions if y'all can bear with me. I'd like to ask, I guess, maybe not so much a philosophical question, but I'd like to ask you both, kind of being professionals in the space, like this, it's a shiny object, bees and butterflies. People like talking about it. I love reading the stories. It's kind of capturing hearts and minds out there. But can you talk about how important this really is, even down to the square foot, when we're talking about the ecological importance of the food chain, feeding the bees and butterflies. Each of you, I'll let Lindsay, ladies first. This, I say it's saving the world type of stuff. But how do you see this as a carbon-based life form and a professional, the value of this work really at any scale?
I see it definitely being a purposeful job that needs to be done. During these construction of solar, they're going to put in vegetation one way or another. So instead of putting your typical lawn fescue, why not incorporate some diversity? Even add, if panel heights is an issue, even adding clover, which is a non-native, but that way you're adding critical vegetation for all different pollinators. And I don't know the exact statistics for the numbers, but 1 in every so many bites is related to a pollinator. And it's amazing the amount of miles that these insects will travel to pollinate because they can't find anything to forage on.
I think looking at it kind of on a big picture, at the habitat that's been lost over the years on the pollinator front, you know, these bees can only travel so far without food. So if you've got these, you know, nice isolated pockets that, you know, create, you know, already have enough foraging opportunity for those insects, but there's nothing beyond that range, you really limit the insect's ability to kind of migrate and move from area to area. The more acreage you can get pollinators incorporated in, the more opportunity you create for these insects to be able to be more mobile, to move from area to area, and creating these corridors for kind of insect migration and being able to expand their habitat. Just because, you know, you put 100 acres in here and then you put 100 acres in, you know, 100 miles away, you know, yes, it benefits those local populations, but also having that corridor that connects those areas creates an opportunity for insects to expand and find other opportunities to propagate and establish residence at.
The other side of the pockets, though, is I think that an asset owner and a developer needs to be held accountable for their vegetation screening. So for instance, if a project is 400 acres and you contact me for a 50-foot setback in just a limited tiny space of where the road is going to be seen, in my view, it's a form of greenwashing. And I know solar people are not going to want to hear that, but I don't want to be contacted for these small little, of course, every square foot does count, but when you have so many acres, why would you not consider doing the buffer zones? Not only is it beautification, it's acting as your erosion control. So that's just one thing I want to add.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. I think it goes back to something Randy mentioned earlier about the opportunity cost of these projects. So it's absolutely true. Every effort, every pollinator garden at home makes a difference. Every window box. Where I grew up, it's kind of the deserts of monoculture. You know, we got millions and millions of acres of one plant, you know. And so, yeah, we need every little tiny oasis, no matter how small. But as we go in this big solar boom, Lindsay, I'm in your camp. We should really, you know, maximize the opportunity at this moment, not greenwash, and squeeze in as much as we can and make sense. And I think as the cost curve changes and the industry continues to mature, some of these things will become more and more affordable. But the other thing, and this is getting to my second to last question, is about communities. Can we click into that perspective? Because some communities are really seeing the value. Some communities are passing county ordinances saying thou shalt plant XYZ minimums of pollinators, but some communities are still very skeptical about solar, and especially solar and soil, solar and farmland. But we, I think, in our conversation today, have really developed kind of a symbiosis between those things. Can you guys put on your glasses or your hat as a community, and because so many are chewing on it right now, and think through the value for them, either as direct participants or just as having this, you know, these great pollinator oases, you know, in their area.
I guess coming from, you know, a farming background and a landowner, I can understand the position of some of these communities being reserved about wanting solar in their community. Some of them don't want to look at it. Some of them are afraid it's going to reduce available farmland for growing food. But I do have a little bit of an issue on the community level viewing it the way some of them do. If you look at the individual farmer, everybody's situation is different. You know, it might be as simple as it's a farmer that's, you know, struggling to make it. You know, grain prices are down, they're going to lose their farm, they own that ground. I do struggle with the idea of the community kind of dictating what that farmer is allowed to do with his land. You know, the alternative to that would be, for me, the ones that are opposed to it, buy the ground. Don't just shut them out of don't just shut them out of solar if you're not going to buy the ground and offer a solution to his problem. And the benefit is creates an opportunity for the farmer to keep his land. And maybe a future generation wants to go back into agriculture on that ground at a later time. And it creates an opportunity for that family to do that while it gets them out of a, over a hurdle that they might be in right, struggling with right now. So on the community level, sometimes I do struggle with the community participation in that on some of their views, because it is hard for me as a landowner and a farmer to think, well, man, my town is going to make it, so I'm just going to lose my farm because I can't afford to do anything else with it. So I do struggle with that, but I do see where most communities are moving in the right direction, and they're simply just wanting the right thing done. And I think this pollinator, this native habitat establishment goes a long ways with the community on getting them on board. I see less and less communities fighting the solar from an aesthetic standpoint or a lack of food standpoint. I see more of them embracing the pollinator and the pollinator establishment kind of side of things, where right up front they're kind of dictating what they want to see. They want to see the native vegetation. They want to see the pollinator habitat. They're on board with sheep grazing opportunity to keep it in agriculture. So there's a range of community reactions, but I think the bulk of them are in a positive direction.
I know for our area, up here in Northeast Pennsylvania, we've had a bad experience with the oil and gas industry back in the day. So a lot of people are skeptic on that. But I know, like, on my commute home, when I'm driving past all these fields, and I think in the back of my head, like, one day these might be developed. So for my thought of seeing solar coming in, if they are incorporating all benefits, if there's sheep on site and you're driving home and you're in a community that's known to farm, you're going to be relieved when you see livestock underneath these solar arrays. I do think ordinances are definitely important to protect a lot of the communities, but there needs to be the realistic setbacks. For instance, if a site is 300 acres and then they want super strict, 300-foot setbacks, you just cut your project all the way down to eight acres. And like what Randy said, you want the farmer to be able to keep his land and have it in the family and still make money at the end of the day.
Yeah, shout out Conservatives for Clean Energy. We had some Virginia Republicans on the live stream, making the arguments from the foundational documents of our nation, from the Constitution. It's right in there, and we'll see that. But I think there's still a big information gap, and they brought that up too. And I think what y'all are doing, it is the pretty pictures, it is the aesthetics. People love it, but these are highly functional habitats, and I think that this kind of green vector, the green electrons, the green dollars, and the actual green high performance habitat and conservation is hopefully starting to win hearts and minds down home, because that's where the land is. That's where we're going to put a lot of these big utility scale projects are in places where I'm from, and hopefully, we'll have this great public dialogue, and it'll shake out, and people will see the real value. So I'm grateful for you guys, being blazing the trail. And as the Ernst family has for generations now, kind of been in the right place and saved the seeds that we're going to need to replant the world and make it happen. So that's my last question. I love to do this, but can you guys zoom in? Are we going to make it, or is the world going to end? No. Can we keep up with the solar expansion and the opportunity? Right. I know, we're doing a lot of greenwashing now, and it's postage stamp pollinators. But y'all are working furiously. We have a labor bottleneck everywhere. Growth is starting to get choked off. But you guys are right in this space. Are we doing okay? And are we gonna make the most of this great American land rush?
I think this is going to be a learning curve year when it comes to vegetation for solar, because like we mentioned earlier, the fescue shortage. Predominantly of the world's fescues coming out of Oregon, and they had drought in the wrong type of the year, too much rain in the wrong type. So there are going to be a lot of hand over fist utility projects that are going to have to purchase and secure seed in upwards of increments. That's one thing. Ernst does a great job, Roundstone Seed, even our buddy Pete providing seed. They do great opportunities. But the thing is the sooner you can get in to secure their seed, the better you are, because in the long run, there are so many other projects. The railroad purchases a lot of seed. Who was it? Conservation out west purchased a whole lot of seed.
I believe out west, the NRCS program started really upticking this last year. I think Ernst Seed was sending semi-loads of native grass seed out west for these NRCS projects. So that does come back around to seed availability. It's something you definitely want to consider. Like she said, with the fescue shortages, I think that's creating an opportunity for a lot of developers to have to look at an alternative revegetation practice than their just comfort with turf type or fescues. So like she said, learning curve. I think there could be a lot of good that comes out of the fescue shortage this year with as many people that are going to have to look at alternative revegetation. And I hope that the outcome is going to be a lot of those that have to make that adjustment, can see the benefit, can see that the risk isn't that high to change the plan, and they'll continue to move towards that practice from here on out.
Yeah. And I definitely, like for instance, the Virginia Green Book, that was written in 1990 or 91. And a lot of engineers that we talk to, they're like, if it's not in the Virginia Green Book, we're not doing it. And I think to myself, if you're using almost 30-year-old specs, I think it's time to modify. Those fescues that you use, they require fertilization. They require a whole lot of different limes and things like that, where some of our natives, you can save that money up front by not paying for the fertilization of sites. So I think this year is going to be a great year for vegetation. I'm excited. We are working on a couple of utility size sites. So we have experience anywhere from 5 acres to utility size, and it's going to be an exciting year, an exciting couple years, because we're already starting to talk about vegetation on sites that for 23 and 24. So now's the time to get in, consider vegetation early in the process.
Awesome. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting year for plants, seeds of all types. Some geopolitical concern, the wheat markets limit up 6 days in a row, and things like that. So the next couple of years are really going to make a difference in so many different ways, positive and negative. Shout out Conservation Blueprint, by the way. That's our buddy Pete. Peter at conservationblueprint.com. Check him out. My last question is not a question, it's really for y'all. Final thoughts, Lindsay and then Randy. I'm really grateful for all the extra time today, 15 minutes bonus time. But and we can keep going. But do you have any kind of final thoughts? We'll be sharing all your contact information. We'll see y'all at the next Virginia Solar Summit, April 27th and 28th in Richmond, Virginia. And so we can continue the conversation there live in the flesh. But final thoughts for our audience today, and to live forever on YouTube.
Yeah. So my final thoughts of the day, of course, is thank you guys for doing the great work that you guys are doing at the Virginia Solar Summit. And we're looking forward to seeing you in person. Final thought would be to incorporate your EPC, your civil, your asset owner in these conversations, because a lot of times we'll talk to one or the other. We can all wrap it together, because the more people that know about installation and know some of the tricks, the better we can have these projects. We don't want to see project failure due to somebody thinking that it's seeding like you seed your lawn, and they call us in the middle of July and say, hey, nothing's green. Well, let's look at your site prep, your seeding, your temperature. So the more conversations that we can have with the whole team as a full front of approaching these projects in one fell swoop would be the best. And I'm excited for what the next couple of years have in solar trends, from sheep grazing to pollinators.
Now, I would say my last thought is let's just keep moving forward, dig into it, see what, your site can use, and and keep striving to do better than just turf type grasses. Get a hold of us here at Monarch, get a hold of Ernst Seed, get a hold of Pete, the Conservation Blueprint, and talk through some strategy, talk through some opportunities, see what's out there available. Don't just sit on your haunches and go to the go-to. Let's let's entertain the opportunities that are going to make your site better than what they have been.
I love the fact that sit on your haunches is now going to be on this YouTube for forever. That's like the highlight of the day.
Yeah.
But it takes me right where I wanted to go, which is, it's time for a new playbook. Start thinking differently. It's a whole renaissance. I use that word all the time, but Lindsay's talking about, we're still, playing with things from the 1990s, and that's fine and good. We have a lot of progress. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, but there's a lot of technology now, a lot of understanding now, and the market is different now. And especially, I think, having the crystal ball I do, or whatever, looking forward, looking through the next decade, adding another billion people to the population, China growing. I mean, just a lot of economic growth. The future value of our soils. I think at a smaller scale, we're going to be looking at a lot of this stuff in the rearview mirror, like the Louisiana Purchase. Like, people fuss and complain that, the Louisiana Purchase, it's a folly, and Napoleon got over on us. Well, what's the value of the Louisiana Purchase today? So I'm super grateful for the work that you guys are doing, and everyone at Monarch Vegetation Services. It's an incredible collection of folks that you have gathered there, kind of preserving the ancient wisdom, but then leading us to where we need to go in the future. And you've been one of the pillars, no joke, that has made me realize, how positive we can be with our forward view, because we have what we need to actually do things the right way, field by field. And I can't imagine this without the work that you're doing. So thank you. Keep going.
Thank you.
Lindsay at monarchveg.com. Monarch Vegetation. Yep. What's the website?
monarchveg.com.
monarchveg.com. All right. Thanks again. Let me see. Can I share my screen? Okay. Are you guys both going to be joining us in Richmond? Randy, are you coming down?
I think Robin and Lindsay are going down to that one, but schedules, we'll see. I may end up with that one.
Well, we'd love to have you. We've got a supersized venue this year. It is the 2022 Virginia Solar Summit, Richmond, Virginia, the historic Ultra Theater. It's a 100-year-old Shriners Temple. April 27th and 28th, with pre-summit networking the night before for you early birds, April 26th. It is again co-hosted by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, Virginia Energy, the West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center at West Virginia University, and Appalachian Voices. Learn more at virginiasolarsummit.com. We're leaning double extra on the networking this year. So if you've been cooped up this winter, if you've been cooped up during the pandemic, we're going to get together 3 nights. I'm going to have to pace myself and go slow. It's a little bit rusty, but I look forward to seeing all my friends again, doing this important work. And especially at the Virginia Solar Summit, something we're really proud of is the diversity of professionals that we have, including you, Lindsay, and Randy, and you folks. We're really the nexus of energy, environment, and economics. And if we can think through some of those prisms in our day-to-day work and really lean forward, I'm confident we're going to get to where we need to be for future generations to then face whatever obstacles there that will present themselves at that point. But anyway, thanks again, guys. We'll see you in Richmond. Keep up the good work, and the future's as bright as Miss White is building it. And you too, Randy.
She's doing a heck of a job, let me tell you.
Yeah,
thank you.
She makes a great jam. Lindsay, we can delete this part out. Do you want to give a quick plug, because you're on Etsy? No kidding about the artisan.
I am on Etsy for Bee's Knees Jelly.
Bee's Knees
and
Jelly.
I'm actually going to be doing dandelion jelly this spring, summer.
Wow. Well, 5 stars for me. I had to send it to a buddy of mine. It's really that pineapple habanero is tasty. So keep up the good work on the craft front as well.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yep. All right, you guys, I'll let you go. Thanks again. Keep up the good
Have
work.
a great day.
Yep. We'll see you soon.